I think Christine and I have had the perfect experiment with what worked and what didn't work, just launching this podcast right now.
Welcome to this episode of Think Like a Producer. This is one of the top 5 most frequently asked questions episodes, the starter pack as we call it. And we wanted to bring these first 5 episodes to you straight away at the top of this show because we know from years of helping people launch podcasts what the most common questions are, and hopefully we're going to cover them. So today's episode is pretty obvious. It's the 5 steps to launch a podcast. And of course, the whole point of this show is to go in great detail, but we wanted to give you a really solid, high level, big picture view of what it looks like to launch a show so that you can get that in your mind as you strategically start to develop your own show. And then, of course, as you listen to future episodes, we're going to give you so much rich, goody nuggets to go deeper on each of these, but we want to give you the big picture in today's episode so that you're empowered with the vision of what needs to happen from idea to actually having a show out in the world. So 5 steps. And the first one, not surprisingly, is to pick your format. And this is a really general way of saying you got to figure out what your show is going to look like. So the big questions are going to be, who's hosting it? Do you have a co-host? Is it just you? Do you have guests on your show? Are you doing solo casts? Do you have a storytelling show, a news show, a comedy show, an educational show? Are you doing an interview show? Is it inspirational? Is it about business? Right? Some of these obvious big questions, but it's really important to get clear because the format of your show will really dictate every other decision you make down the line for years to come. So choosing your format is step 1. On the audio side, I'm going to give you a couple things to think about, and then just going to give you a couple things to think about on video. But just the basics, like we said, we'll get into more detail in further episodes. Format-wise, you want to really understand, okay, how am I going to record this thing? Am I going to sit in my home studio and turn on a mic and just me, myself, and I record my thoughts or my coaching or my expertise? Or do I need to figure out how to interview guests? And if so, am I going to do it in person? Am I going to do it remote? These are the kind of format questions you want to ask yourself because it's going to impact obviously what equipment you buy, but also like how often you can record an episode. Do you have to work around guest schedules? Can you do it by yourself at midnight when the kids are in bed? These are the kind of things that you want to think about. So formatting your show, these are the big questions. Now, Tiff, what should we think about if we want to bring video into it when we're considering the format of the show?
Where's the video going to live? Most obviously, people think about YouTube. That's where you're watching this video right now. But some people actually have a bigger audience on Facebook. Some people are thinking they want to send all their traffic to their website. So maybe they have private videos on whichever platform they choose and they want everyone to go to the website. And so you can't find it anywhere else but there. Think about that. I mean, every time I talk to anyone, any of my clients that are like, I just want to do a YouTube channel. I'm like, are you sure you want to do a YouTube channel? Because of course the benefits, people can search, they can find you. However, building a YouTube channel, building subscribers, all that stuff may not actually be what you're interested in, even though you still want to use video. So hosting videos just on your site, having that kind of format, is just as far as what we're talking about here, having that kind of format might be your thing. Or if you're choosing to actually not have the full podcast live, like basically like what Christine and I are doing, where you have the video and the audio format, maybe you literally are like, I'm just going to have one camera, kind of record the behind the scenes of what we're doing. And the format that I'm kind of choosing to sort of use here is to just post the behind the scenes on Instagram, right? Just for people to see, to use for my marketing videos and everything like that. But maybe I don't want the full, the weight of editing full podcast videos and having a whole other platform to build. So think about that when you're choosing your format, choosing the place, the platform that you probably want to host your actual videos on. Once you've picked the platform, the format of the show, now it is the style. So Christine, on the audio side, what should they be thinking about when it comes to style?
Beautiful. So obviously with podcasting, you'd be like, what do you mean style? Like it's audio only. Well, yes, except you do need artwork. because on any podcast listening platform, as you probably know if you are a podcast fan, there's little thumbnail artwork. They're little square pieces of graphic, and it has the name of the show and oftentimes a photo of the host, or could be anything. So you actually do have to do a little bit of graphic design. This is the fun part. It's not a burden. Obviously, you're going to look at your resources and decide if you're awesome with graphics, you could make it yourself. Most people are going to hire a designer or use the designer you already work with. So, this is going to be the visual representation of your show on all the podcast platforms. So, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Amazon, wherever your podcast is living, everyone's going to see the same artwork. And so, there are several things to consider when you make that. We'll go into deep detail in later episodes about some pros and cons and what to think about. But basically, you want it to have the name of the show and you want it to visually reflect the style of your show. So if your show is geared for women and it's about beauty and wellness and kind of that divine feminine energy, you're going to have very different artwork than if you have a really serious business, finance, stocks and bonds kind of show, to state the obvious. So you're going to do some styling with the actual artwork of the show. And of course, that can translate into the graphics you use anywhere to promote the show. So your social media graphics will be a reflection of that podcast artwork. If you have a YouTube channel, obviously you'll have that artwork in a different format over there. So that's going to kind of be the visual styling of your show. And then a few other things to consider as far as styling a show. You want to think about your description and the title of your show, and do they all make sense and flow together? So this is about styling the voice, the written voice and the actual voice of how the show sounds. So you're going to think about the music you're going to select to go with the kind of intro bumper of your show that plays at the beginning of the episodes. You're going to think about what that written description sounds like, and does that fit with the visual artwork and the host and what you're actually talking about. So this is in my opinion, one of the funnest parts of starting the show. But it's very important to take it seriously, make sure it's cohesive, it's on brand, it fits with whatever you want your show to represent. Because when people are just scanning the podcast apps looking for a new show, or they've maybe heard about your show and they're trying to find it, it's very helpful for your artwork and your description and the title of your show to all make sense, so that when they find it, they're like, oh, totally. Yeah, that's what I wanted to listen to. So styling your show is a lot of fun, but do take it seriously. Invest as many resources as you can. A lot of people will hire a photographer to do a photo shoot just for their podcast so they can have a really awesome photo if you decide you want your face on your podcast artwork. We'll talk about the strategy of that in future episodes. So styling your show that way is very important. Now, obviously, there's a video component. So what do you need to know about styling your videos, Tiff?
Just so you know, I'm gonna let the little subscribe button come up here. We had 2 separate people work on our art/graphics, right? So, Amela, who, we'll have links to everyone down below in the description, but Amela helped us with the artwork that Christine is describing. And our total visuals, us being cartoons, which has been like a dream of mine to just be
So
a
fun.
cartoon, like, absolutely. And then there are the actual motion graphics that you see. So the lower thirds that have popped up on the screen at the beginning of this, our opening credits, our actual intro, our outro, our end screen, all this was actually designed by a different team, Jorge and Veronica, a married editing team, which is just like another dream of mine. Like, that'd be so cool to work with my future partner. But when we thought about this show, when I thought about this show, knowing that we are going to have video, of course, Christine gets her beautiful artwork to make sure the website and the show notes and everything look great. But I also want to make sure that we have a beautiful industry standard look when it comes to our videos. And that is a different job description. That's a different person. Now, that is if you choose to have YouTube be the platform. We talked about that earlier. Maybe you just want to post these videos as like a behind the scenes or something for your Instagram account. So think about the style, think about what you can do just a little bit differently. Leading into that, the fact that it does take a little bit more when it comes to the visual representation of these shows. If you're going to use video, now we can talk about the recording of episodes. So the beautiful thing about Christine and myself, if this is the first time watching us, you may not know this, we worked together for a very long time on a podcast that was both video and audio. And when it came to recording the episodes, it was mainly my job to make sure that all 3 cameras, yes, 3 cameras were set up, audio was running, backup audio was running. It not only was a bit of a process to make sure that everything was rolling in at the highest quality, but it also took a lot of storage. And this is one thing I feel like most people don't think about, but I would love for you to consider. If you're going to do video, if you're going to do high quality, high definition video, it's going to be a lot more space on hard drives, on your cameras, all that stuff when it comes compared to audio. I know that when we were working at the School of Greatness, I think I ended up recording over 5 years about 50 terabytes of hard drives and storage. And you can Google what a terabyte is. It's very big. So just think about that. And it's not something to scare you or to say like you don't have enough space or you don't have enough time to record episodes all in video, but more so just know where you are. If you have a cousin who likes to do video and loves to sort and loves to edit and all those different things, and you have some help on that, that's great. If you're starting on your own, this is where I would recommend the one camera kind of thing. Just maybe just the behind the scenes, maybe it's just you on a solo, maybe you're just not adding too much to your plate, because to edit the audio is just one whole job itself. To edit the video is something else. And like I said, if you're starting out and you don't want to grow both a podcast channel and a YouTube channel at the same time, really consider what it would look like for you to market this on TikTok or Instagram, where the video is helpful, but may not necessarily need to be so amazing for 30, 40, 60 minutes at a time. But like I said, I'm not trying to scare you. On future videos, on future episodes, I'll talk more about how you can make video work for you in the best way possible. But Christine, when it comes to recording your episodes on the audio side, what do you recommend?
So important and not as scary as you might think. So, like we talked about, at this point, you'll have figured out whether you're doing guest interviews or solo casts, whether you're doing in person, guests coming to be with you, or whether you're going to do remote interviews. So, you get to just pick your equipment based on those decisions. And if you only need one microphone because you're just going to record you, yourself, and I, then you can really maybe splurge on that microphone and set up a great little spot in your home or your office, similar to Tiff's beautiful microphone we talked about on the equipment episode. So check that one out, where we answered the best equipment to get for podcasting. So you're going to set up your recording space. And if you have a show where you're constantly moving and you're meeting people in different spaces, obviously your recording setup is going to look totally different than if you have a home studio that you're always recording from. But essentially, once you've figured out your setup and you have it ready to go, you want to start recording episodes well ahead of when you launch your show. And when I say well ahead, a month would not be too early. 2 months would not be too early. 3 months would not be too early to start recording episodes before you're actually going to launch your show. Here's why. Obviously, you're going to have to figure out all your technical stuff. So I highly, highly, highly recommend recording an episode as a test episode before you ever do a quote unquote real episode, for example, with a guest that you want to make sure goes smoothly. So if you're doing interview-based shows, of course, do a test run with a friend. Make sure everything's working on all fronts. Listen back to it. Check your audio quality. If you're doing video, obviously check your video quality. Go through the full kind of start to finish of recording an episode to make sure you've got all your technical issues worked out. And it's not a bad idea to do a few of those, because you'll notice, it might all work perfectly the first time, but then the second time you do it, something happened you weren't anticipating. So do a few test round runs. If you're doing a solo show where you really only have to worry about you, awesome. It's probably going to be a lot easier. But you're going to want to play around things with like how close the microphone is to my mouth and where I placed my camera and maybe how long my episode went, and maybe play around with a few formats. So give yourself some space. If you're really experienced already with making content, like if you've been doing videos on social media for a long time, this might come more naturally to you. But just so you know, it's going to be a different setup because you're using a high quality mic, and there's a little bit of a different cadence to a podcast. So do some test runs, start recording episodes well before launch, bank several if you have time, and that will really help you get into the rhythm, especially if you're working with guests and you need to have a wake-up call about how challenging it can be sometimes to schedule people, reschedule people, have tech issues come up, you maybe can't use all your recordings for one reason or another. This is all, you might think this sounds like a fantasy, like, yeah, Christine, if I had time. Here's what we're going to tell you from years of experience. It is worth it to let yourself do several sort of amateur first time episodes before you do anything you really care about. So this is very valuable practice time that I promise you will thank yourself for later, because no matter how experienced you are with interviews or creating content, there is a different element to podcasting, and you got to give yourself permission to kind of not be so great at it at the beginning and let yourself do some less than perfect episodes to kind of get your feet wet. So batch record several episodes, do some test runs with a friend, make sure all your equipment's working, do all of your technical checks. And once you have several episodes recorded, edited, obviously you're going to figure out how you're editing things, whether you're hiring an editor, you're doing it yourself. This becomes quite a bit more time consuming once you have video involved. So give yourself that runway. But once you have a good amount of episodes, I would say bare minimum have 3 to 5 episodes recorded before you launch. And bare minimum, then you're ready for step 4. And this is where you're actually going to submit your show to the podcast platforms. So, what that looks like is you choose a hosting service. This is sort of the audio version of YouTube, but there's over 20 hosting services for podcasting. My personal favorite is called Simplecast. It's what we host Think Like a Producer on. Anchor.fm is an awesome one that was acquired by Spotify a few years ago. It's designed for sort of hobbyists who don't want to have to do a lot of technical work. There are so many great ones. Libsyn, Art19, the list goes on and on. So you're going to pick a hosting service, and that's where you're actually going to upload your MP3 files. So this is actually how your episodes get out into the world. So you sign up with a hosting service. It's probably going to cost you $15 a month to start, so nothing crazy. And then once you've signed up with that hosting service, you create an account and they walk you through actually submitting your show to the podcast platforms. And when I say podcast platforms, I mean Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Studios, all of these places that people consume podcasts will get your show through your hosting service. So you set up a hosting service, you go through the steps and submit your show, and you actually need to have an episode sort of published on your feed, which is just like a blog feed. So it's kind of the web address that all these platforms pull your episodes from. And that's why you'll needed to record episodes before you submit your show. You actually have to have an episode, quote unquote, published on your feed before you can submit your show. Now, personally, I always recommend recording a trailer as your episode 0, if you will. And there's a special place in your hosting service you can mark that episode as a trailer. So every time a brand new person finds your podcast on any platform, they'll see, oh, here's the trailer. Let me listen to that first. So I'm a big fan of recording a trailer. It's essentially just like a TV show trailer, except it's audio only. And so you record a little intro to your episode. It could be 1-2 minutes long. You submit that as your first quote unquote episode, and you let it go to the platforms. Now, typically for most hosting services, the submittal time is really only going to be a few days. So if you submitted your show, let's say on a Monday, you would likely see it on all the major podcast platforms by Friday. Obviously, there's some fluctuation time. It depends on how busy things are, whether there were any issues with your show. So I'm a big fan, yet again, of giving yourself a buffer. And I would say submit your show at least a couple weeks before you want it to be sort of live and talking about it where people can listen. But I know we got a little technical there. We'll get into it more later, but that's the overview of what it looks like to submit your show on the audio side. And this is the most technical part of podcasting. You'll only have to do this once. It's not too crazy, believe me, but you are going to have to get in a little bit into the details and actually create some accounts and set up some services and connect some dots. So that's it for audio. Tiff, what do you need to do to submit your show if you want to have a video show?
This is the one place where video is so much easier. Most people, I feel like, have a Gmail account, or it's very easy to set up a Gmail account. If you want to start a YouTube channel, it's very easy. All your videos are hosted on that YouTube channel. There's not a lot of connection that needs to happen. Most likely you already have a YouTube channel. Same thing for Facebook. Same thing for if you want to do Vimeo. Like I said, if you kind of just want to have your videos mostly on social, LinkedIn, there's just so many places, and it's typically really easy. It's just like uploading a photo on Instagram in order for you to get your videos up. What I will say, though, that becomes a bit more difficult, or where I think people sometimes get stuck, is whether whether or not to have their show live as a separate channel and a separate brand compared to having it on their own personal brand. For example, Christine and I have our own personal brands. So having this show live under one of our, Gmail accounts, or having it say Tiff Tyler or Christine Baird, wouldn't have worked for what we're trying to build this show to be. Because while we are the hosts right now, we just want more and more people to submit and give their expertise. This is more of a branded kind of show, not a personal branded kind of show, if that makes sense. And, I think a lot of people don't know whether or not to have their name on what they're doing, or to have their more of like their business be the name. So we do have an entire episode about the pros and cons of personal branding. But that's what I would say when it comes to submitting your show, just understanding whether or not it's going to live under your personal YouTube. Because some people, which I'm sure you've seen, some people they separate by playlists. So they might have their vlogs and all their different things on one playlist, and they might have their podcast on a different playlist. There's probably a few different issues that could come with that, but one of the main issues that I see with that is watch time. If your vlog videos are usually like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and your podcast is, an hour long, you're kind of messing up your watch time a little bit of what people are actually choosing to see. And watch time is very important on YouTube when it comes to ranking and YouTube promoting your video across different places that, your hashtags and everything aren't able to kind of get to you by itself. So it might sound a little complicated, or it might be like, duh, Tiff. I don't know. We probably have a whole other episode on promoting on YouTube, but just to understand that watch time is very, very important. So you don't want to mix having short form videos with long form videos on one YouTube channel. You want to kind of pick a 15-minute to 30-minute sort of range, or you want to pick an hour to 90-minute kind of range, or you want to stick to your 3 to 5 minute range. Just stick to that so that YouTube can see that people are consuming your videos the right way, the way that they want to actually boost your channel. That's what I'd say when it comes to actually thinking about that on the video platform. Now, the last thing, and Christine really went into, I think, really well, is it's time to actually launch your podcast, your show, whatever the thing is that's going to be, your next big thing. What I would say when it comes to launching is pretty much to mimic what Christine said. You want to be as far ahead as possible when it comes to even the episode ideas, how you're going to market it, what you're going to do with it. I think Christine and I have had the perfect experiment with what worked and what didn't work, just launching this podcast right now, launching this YouTube channel. When you're so far ahead and you have 3, 5, maybe 6 episodes already recorded, it helps when it comes to fixing tweaks and minor things, and, any issues you run into, at least you can kind of see it. And the other thing I would say when it comes to launching and just being ahead is that Christine and I know how long it takes now to record an episode, whether it's, just audio and video. How long Christine already knows from editing for so long, and so do I, how long it takes to edit an episode, to get it up on YouTube, to get it up on the podcast platform. So when you're launching and when you're ready to go, I would say right now, hopefully you listen to us, you're ahead, and you get to think about the marketing side. And this is this is like my baby. My favorite part of this is now letting the world know that this exists, it's up, and thinking strategically, again, how you want to tell people. Is Instagram your biggest platform? Is Facebook your biggest platform? It's not really like one account is going to be the one that helps people see your show necessarily. It's wherever your audience is right now. How can you market to them the best so that they know that you're there, it exists, and you can kind of get the fan base over from maybe your personal account or anything like that to let them know that this is here. Christine and I kind of did a really interesting launch, I think, on our Think Like a Producer Instagram, and it's slowly building. We have our OG fans on there already. But just the fact that we had 6 posts kind of like ready to go before people got on there, as opposed to just one, and just more things for people to see and consume, and more things that we could reshare on our personal accounts, just gave more attention to that account. And like I said, we have a whole video on the pros and cons of having personal brands versus business brands, but there's a way to tie the two in. But when you launch, you really want to think about your goal. And I know Christina is going to talk about the goal when it comes to audio, because I don't think we both know that the goal for launching and marketing a podcast is very different from the video. When I'm thinking about YouTube, I'm thinking about subscribers, watch time, if people commented on it, did they engage with it? But engaging with a podcast is very different than engaging with the video. So I would also say maybe have some launch goals. How many people do you want to have subscribed to your channel within the first month, 2 months, 3 months? How much effort and time do you have to put towards the launch and the marketing side? And then I guess my last note, and I'll pass it back to Christine, is to think about the consistency of your show. What day is it going to come out? That everyone needs to know that this is the day. This is when the new podcast and content is coming out. Because when you get ahead, the best thing is that you have a couple weeks set up, but you really want to let people know and constantly tell them Thursdays, or whichever day of the week, so that not only you get subscribers, but you kind of like you get a full fan base that knows when to expect. And the consistency and the trust that you build with them is priceless when it comes to these things. That's how I think in the marketing side and the video side when it comes to launching. But Christine, launching the audio is very different from launching video. What should we know?
Okay, so frequently asked question, of course, there is a new and noteworthy section in Apple Podcasts, which is sort of considered the place you want to get featured when you have a new podcast. Apple Podcasts is really the only platform currently that people pay attention to as far as rankings. Spotify's coming for it. Spotify's put a ton of resources into their podcast platform this year. So in the future, we'll be updating you about how important Spotify becomes. But right now, still, Apple is where people notice a new podcast. So this new and noteworthy section is sort of the place that you would want to focus your efforts if you cared a lot about a big launch. Now, the disclaimer here is you do not have to care about a big launch. Like, there's no really big important incentive for most people to try and make it into the new and noteworthy section. We'll cover this in later episodes, like we'll do a whole episode about launch strategy, but just to kind of paint the big picture, if you want to launch your show in a big way, the things you'll want to pay attention to is teasing your show well ahead of launch. So on social media, on your emails, wherever your audience currently listens to you, you're going to want to let them know you have a podcast coming out. And that would look like posting a picture or doing a story of you, setting up your podcast equipment, or behind the scenes, I just recorded my first episode, or maybe you tease your artwork and let people vote on their favorite. Essentially, you're letting them know a few weeks ahead of time, I have a podcast coming out. You get people excited, you get people invested, and then however much strategy you want to put into a launch, you can. Obviously, you can go really big, just like you would with a book launch if you were trying to make New York Times bestseller list. You don't have to. I'm just kind of painting a picture. If you want to go big with a launch, there's as much prep work as humanly possible as if you were doing a massive launch for like a TV show or a book. You certainly don't need to do that, but definitely let people know your show's coming out before it comes out, and whatever that looks like for you, social media, emails, things like that. And then when the show officially launches, meaning the day that you tell people it's live, go listen to it, there's a couple of things you're going to want to really focus on. Obviously, ask people to subscribe and listen, but especially you're going to want people to leave ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. And that's a very specific call to action that you need to repeat many times because, like we said earlier, Apple Podcasts is really the platform that podcast ranking pays attention to. And so the more ratings and reviews you have on Apple Podcasts, the more legitimate your show looks to that algorithm, the more likely you will be ranking in your category. You probably won't make new and noteworthy unless you really do have thousands of people listening right away and you have some big name guests, or you are a big enough name that Apple recognizes you and it's like, oh, this is a really cool thing we want to feature. But for most of us, when we start a show, there is a chance we could potentially rank in our category. So we talked about this in an earlier episode. Part of setting up your show is actually selecting what category you want your show to fall under. And so there's a good chance on your first day, your first week of launching your show, if you have several hundred people listening to your show, you could end up ranking in the top, 100 of your category. And that's awesome. So that's a little bit of the strategy of launching a show. Tell people ahead of time, tease it, get people excited, get people enthused. When you finally launch it, specifically ask them to subscribe to the show, listen, and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And then, of course, just like you would with any other big launch, you're going to talk about it for a long time. You're going to talk about it pretty much every day for the first week. You're going to talk about it every week. You're going to show a lot of gratitude for all of your early fans and supporters. You can screenshot their reviews on Apple Podcasts and share it on your Instagram, your Facebook. You can do emails about it and do special stories and Instagram lives and posts. And as we know, not everyone's going to see all of your promotion. So you want to do plenty for a couple of months so that your audience truly can't miss it. And you'll be surprised, even months after you launch your show, when you'll run into a fan or a customer or someone who's followed you and they'll be like, "Oh, I had no idea you had a podcast." And you'll think, how on earth could you not know? But it's because, as we know, everyone's taking in information differently. Your messages aren't being received by everyone. So the launch period is really like the first month or two, but you really want to focus that first day and that first week on a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, rallying your true fans, directing them to, make sure to go subscribe, download, leave a rating and review, share with your friends, and then show a lot of gratitude and feedback for people who do that early on. Now, as we'll say time and again, podcasting is a long game. So a lot of the success of your show will actually come after launch for the vast majority of us. If we're not Oprah or Jay Shetty, like, we're not going to have the top ranking podcast in our category on week one. But it does help to put a lot of good energy and momentum once your show is out in the world and let people know, because they, honest to goodness, will have no idea that you have a new podcast if you don't tell them. You're not going to just magically appear at the top of a chart because you're a new show. It's not how it works. It's all on your own shoulders to promote your show for the first little while before your fans and your network get it, and then they start talking about it for you. So, this has been a pretty whirlwind kind of overview of the 5 steps to launching your podcast. I'm sure you have a ton more questions, and that's why you should absolutely subscribe to Think Like a Producer. Subscribe on YouTube, hit us up over on any of the podcast channels if you'd prefer to listen, because we have so much more to dive into on each of these 5 steps. We can't cover it all in one episode, so we wanted to give you the introductory 5 steps so you have a good big picture view of what needs to happen. And of course, we'll be going into each of these more in detail. So subscribe to our show. Of course, leave us in a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We read everyone. We love that feedback. It helps other people to know the show is legitimate and it's high value. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you are ready to launch a show, you're already, I want to do it. I'm here. Okay, awesome. We actually have an in-depth course to teach you everything we just covered in way more detail with a lot more strategy. So if you are the DIY type, you're ready to go, you want to take it on and do it yourself, click on the link in the notes below for the Worthful Media podcast course. Specifically, I recorded this course. I dumped my entire brain into it from years of launching podcasts so that you could go through at your own pace, launch your show with a lot of expert advice. So that course is for you. Check it out. Link in the show notes. You can join anytime. It's self-guided. And I would love to support you in launching your podcast through that course.
Awesome. So thank you again so much for watching. Check out this next episode where we talk about the best equipment for recording your podcast.
Oh, whoopsie daisy. The camera keeps going off.
Whoopsie daisy.
Here. Okay.
Because we went
course call to action, and then you can say thanks
Bye.
for listening.